Hello, hi, I'm Zinfogel. So, we got quite the update for December. We have 6 new sync pairs and 3 grids for low tier gachas. Given how much ground there is to cover, I figured I would first talk about the new grids. We are already familiar with these units, and that should be easy to do. I need more time to gather my thoughts regarding the new sync pairs, but if you really need to know right now, Lusamine is gross, borderline criminal. I am going to sound like a clickbaiter, but Lusamine is looking like the best striker in the game right now. She is a textbook example of gacha power creep. I will cover her properly in the second part of this video, but Lusamomi is the kind of unit people regret missing. In any event, these new grids breathe life into sync pairs who are otherwise outclassed in almost every way. For example, Sophocles is now a competent sync nuker who rivals Sydney and Mask Royal. This bodes extremely well for how DNA is going to treat older gachas moving forward. First up, we have Candice and Abomasnow, a 3-star Ice-type tech. Perhaps one of the more complex subjects to have won the grid lottery. Candice's purpose in life is Hail. Hail does 3 explicit things. It fixes Blizzard accuracy, it deals recoil damage when a Pokémon lacks Snow Shelter, and it activates Hail-related passives, such as Healing Hail and Invigorating Hail. In order to define Candice's relevance as a unit, broaching Hail as an archetype is inevitable. Unfortunately, I am not the most avid Hail user. I have played Hail here and there, but as a playstyle, it has some issues we need to discuss. Before doing that, I want to briefly go over Candice's kit. It's good information to have in case you are unfamiliar with the unit. Candice isn't terrible. She has decent stats. If we raise this to 5-star potential, I would call this good. Good bulk, average offense, good speed. The most attractive part of Candice's kit is her nuke. Her innate sync multiplier is heavy hail. When the weather is hail, you get the boost. The setup is simple, and coming off Candice's attack, it's decent. But in the current metagame, there are nukes that easily surpass hers. The real problem is that besides her nuke, Candice is stuck with Ice Punch. This is a sad 2-bar move with a 10% chance to freeze. This move ruins Candice's DPS. As for trainer moves, Candice can buff speed to help with gauge management, and her trainer move consumes gauges in order to buff stats. When you consume 3 gauges, you get +4 attack and +4 special defense. This is something I really like about Candice that eases her team compositions. She is partially self-sufficient. She can maximize attack and only demands crit support. Lastly, Candice has anti-freeze for status immunity and innate snow shelter to immunize herself from hail recoil. With this knowledge, trying to justify Candice's team slot is a challenge. She only offers Hail and a standard tech sync nuke. However, as a Hail user, Candice rarely has any competition. Only Tech Lapras and newcomer Nessa and IceQ are contesting for the role. There are more contrite ways of summoning Hail, like Cold Front Rosanta or Summer Steven, but direct Hail is difficult to come by. But you see, Hail itself suffers from a fundamental issue in that it doesn't boost Ice-type damage. It's not like Rain Dance where you can turn fucking Marlon into a striker with it. You are slotting Hail specifically to trigger passives, and Hail abusers are far in between. For example, Price has Invigorating Hail 6, but since Getsis' release, he just plays better with Freeze Synergy 16. And do you really want to force yourself to slotting Candice just to give Hala a 20% multiplier? Hail's primary issue is support compression. Its current users are underwhelming. By hand-fisting Invigorating Hail, you don't receive proportionate offensive pressure in return. Say with Rain, you have Archie and May who are strong standalone offensive units. As for Sand, you have Ingo who compresses so many functions in one team slot, you can afford 2 strikers to pump up damage. Hail, on the other hand, is clunky. The current dynamic of Hail builds is DPS based. Summer Steven and Hala have excellent trainer moves that afford aggressive setup, but slotting Candice or Tech Lapras used to enable the mode drags down the pace of the team. That's why Candice fell into obscurity despite having access to something as powerful as a field effect. She has Hail, but barely offers anything beyond it. And Hail is frankly redundant for Hail abusers. They can do better things with their time. Until Candice is Greed. Hail is going to improve a lot this month because we have 4 new Hail abusers, counting Candice herself. Now we can get to the juicy bit. When Candice's Greed releases, she also unlocks her 6-star EX potential, but I don't think she needs to go that high for viability. This Grid offers a couple tools Candice craved: multipliers and self-sufficiency. She now has Inertia, Heavy Hail 2, and Sinking Tiles. Do remember, Candice supplies all these sync multipliers on her own. With X speed, she can buff Inertia, and she casts her own Hail. Candice doesn't suffer from dependency, unlike other techs who necessitate partners to assist their Sync. With this much scaling and at 5-star potential, Candice nukes slightly harder than Olivia and Lycanroc. And that is a big name. Olivia has one of the hardest hitting striker sync nukes in the metagame. Coming back to Ice-type nukes, Getsis out-nukes Olivia, but how many ways are there to debuff -6 speed and -6 attack in 3 turns? Candice is miles easier to set up. That comparison doesn't even account for her 6-star EX potential, and Candice also has this random super preparation 4 tile on her trainer move to pump up her nuke with super effective up and next. This is the kind of roll compression Hale was looking for. Candice can now justify herself with her bomb despite her awful DPS. She offers similar value to a 6-star EX support. Candice deletes center while a Hale abuser handles DPS. For example, you can bring Hilbert, Summer Steven, and Candice, and their output commands respect. Candice contributes a huge portion of damage with her Sync nuke. But do keep in mind, if you have a proper Ice-type Sync nuker like 6-star EX 2-5 Hala or 6-star EX 3-5 Holiday Leon, they just clear stages more efficiently by virtue of their AoE Sync nuke. Candice slots better when you lack that kind of resource. By understanding Candice's newfound purpose, we can now assess her grid utility. Going forward, keep in mind the correct way of playing Candice is with the inertia. She needs her Singnook to justify herself in Hail. Otherwise, Nessa and Ice Cube are better. Going to the other end of the spectrum, Candice now has several cheap tiles to augment Ice Punch, and with Ramming Speed, this move has a serviceable DPS. It's kind of like running Boxy and Scyther as a striker. Nothing impressive, but Candice's DPS is not dead weight if you plan to use a 6-star EX support before syncing with her. If you plan to focus on this mode, Candice also has Ice Punch Hostile Environment 1 for a 20% chance to proc freeze for some mild crowd control. Over here we have X-Speed Fleet Feet 1, which I really like. By using X-Speed twice, Candice maximizes inertia and ramming speed. Down here we have Hail tiles, the most important of which is Hail Follow Through 9. When Candice casts Hail, she applies Surecrit on herself. This is a game changer. The intent is that you buff twice, cast Hail to activate Candice's innate sync multiplier, apply Surecrit with it, and then go to town. She has a reliable sync nuke with a self-crit buff. Candice only cares about her nuke, so she doesn't need crit support. This relieves a ton of pressure from her tier partner. You can run Rosanta plus Summer Steven with Hail follow through, no problem. This creates a fascinating dance with Candice's trainer moves where you can approach Zinfogel Abomasnow a couple ways. You can buff twice with Candice's trainer move or with X speed. Then you provide the corresponding buffs she's missing through Skyla, Hope, or whomever. This grid is legit. Candice now has to be acknowledged as a self-sufficient Ice-type sync nuker who necessitates minimal support to operate successfully. Now, if that isn't juicy enough for you, Candice also has self-sustain. She can apply regeneration with Sync Regen, and she can restore even more health with Healing Hail 1 to match Tech Lapras. The issue with this mode is that while it's fantastic recovery, you have to sacrifice a good chunk of Candice's Sync Nuke to go for it. Candice also has Hail NPR2. I am not a fan of the chance. Some strategies may want to attempt the proc, but a battle should be over by the time Candice launches a second Sync Nuke. And to wrap up Candice's grid, she also has Hasty Hail 2, which charges the move gauge faster when Candice summons Hail. Accounting for X speed, she is a good gauge generator. I am pleasantly impressed with Candice's grid. Is she insane or top tier? No, but Candice now has enough tools to become an active team asset. This is way more than I was expecting DNA to give a unit like Candice, whose 5-5 grid is basically free to play. I am not exaggerating when I say Zinfogel Candice puts Hail teams on the radar. If you are a hardcore Candice stan, her 6-star EX Zinfogel complements her kit very well, and it's strong enough for 2k off-type. Overall, a solid unit all around. This is already over 10 minutes long, and for a 3-star gacha, I want to be thorough. Candice enables an archetype, and almost everyone has realistic access to her 5-5 grid, so she may help you out. Anyway, as for standard grids, I would suggest something like this. Do keep in mind that if you grab Super Preparation 4, going for Heavy Hail 2 is worse than a sinking tile, which may explain some of my padding here. But Follow Through 9 is amazing for that reliable guaranteed sync nuke. And Hasty Hail 2 enables more aggressive strategies with Hail DPS users like Hala or Holiday Leon. If you want a Hail NPR for some reason, then you can drop a Super Preparation 4, but it's unreliable to begin with. Same for Hail NPR. If you want to support the Candice's critical hit rate instead through Hilbert or Lily, you can do something like this. Go for a little bit of more sinking power and X speed flip feed 1. And if you want to use Candice off type, then you can run her with all her sinking power to make her as indiscriminate as possible. Of course, Hail follow through 9 for the sure crit. And if you want to do more fun things with Candice, then you can turn her into a tank. She has decent special defense at 4-star potential even, and she can maximize it with her trainer move. So if you run her alongside Torchic and Price, then you have a free-to-play clear in Champion Stadium. And do know that most Champion Stadium stages that are weak to ice, with the exception of Kahili, spam special damage. And Candice has decent healing, so she may be your best option for eating that punishment. Otherwise, you can drop a portion of Candice's Sing Nuke, so you can run Ramming Speed and all of the Ice Punch styles, but it's the same difference. You sacrifice your Nuke to deal more damage, but you could be sacrificing damage to deal better Nuke, you know? And if you have 6-star EX 3-5 Holiday Leon for his Heavy Hail Sing Nuke, then you can run Candice to enable him instead, because at that point, then Leon nukes better than Candice, and you can run pure DPS on Candice so she's not a total deadweight, and just pair them up with Hilbert and you can go to town. But yeah, if it's not clear by the length of this section, perhaps the longest analysis I have ever done, I am very excited about Candice. I think she will be a great contribution to the metagame. Up next, we have Brycen Cryogonal, also a fellow 3-star Ice type tech. This guy is a lot less exciting than Candice though. Brycen is super Yankee, and his grid barely addresses that. Brycen exists for one reason and one reason only: haste. He is the only free-to-play source of stat removal. Brycen is the kind of sync pair who is nearly globally useless except for specific stages. But the stages where he's useful, oh lordy, those stages are merciless without him. Brycen is worth slotting against aggressive enemy buffs, like Cresselia's Legendary Arena or the Glacia Battle Challenge currently underway. Besides that, Brycen's trainer move grants special defense and endure. He can do some rudimentary endure tanking, but physical moves shatter him, so he doesn't make for the best tank. As for the rest, oof. You know how there are dictionaries with pictures in them? Brycen's photo would be on the incongruence entry. I am not gonna sugarcoat things. There is a reason some people are not even aware Brycen is in this game. The rest of the things Brycen can do are poor, even in optimal circumstances. Cryogonal has Ice Beam and Ancient Power for coverage, but these are very weak 2-bar moves, and it's backed up by a mediocre special attack stat. Brycen's DPS ranks amongst the worst outputs in this game. Even when super effective, his damage is awful, and he needs full offensive babysitting. If you want to salvage Brycen, he needs potent special supports like Custom Jasmine or Sabrina. Whenever I am stuck with Brycen, I prefer using Ancient Power for the 10% chance to Omnibuff. Brycen has a fantastic speed stat, and with a few buffs, he can become a gauge battery. Conversely, you can spam Ice Beam for the 10% chance to freeze for some crowd control. Now, worst of all is Brycen E-Sync move. This has Lear Isignate Sync multiplier, where if the enemy has no stat raises, you get the boost. It plays off of haste. This specific multiplier has a higher peak relative to standard sinks, so it's okay. The problem is that it's physical. Brycen works with special moves but has a physical sing move. This adds a whole new layer of issues. Brycen demands omnibuffers. He wants help from Faulkner, Signals of Blue, or Lyra. Alternatively, you can laser focus on Brycen's quote-unquote DPS or his quote-unquote Singnuke and bring the corresponding support. But Striker Brycen is a challenge and not worth the hassle. I did a Badmin Sunday on him once, and I think it's one of my worst showcases. Signals of Blue hard carried that battle, and I can barely say Brycen contributed. Lastly, Brycen's passives are somewhat useless. He has Snow Shelter and Healing Hail 1 for play under Hail, but his toolkit doesn't contribute to the archetype in the slightest. If Brycen didn't have Haze, he would be a strong candidate for worst sync pair in the game. He is an abject disaster in every way. Messy moveset, very needy, and at his peak performance, he is underwhelming. So let's extract Brycen's pure essence. He is a haze bot with freeze utility and self-buff utility. For the former role, Brycen now has Ice Beam Hostile Environment 2. That's a 30% chance to proc freeze. For a fleeting moment, I misread it as Hostile Environment 5 because of this style, and I felt genuine happiness, but no. This is equally as good as Ice Beam Glacia or the Cold Snap 2 Getsis. Brycen can attempt to proc free synergy for other strikers. However, Brycen now also has Ice Beam free synergy 5 for a direct multiplier. If you grab every Ice Beam tile and attack a frozen target, Brycen hits about as hard as Invigorating Hail 5 Glacia. That's approximately 2000 damage after one sync move. It's not the best, and Brycen still requires full offensive babysitting, but if it's super effective, it's decent cheap damage, and you can freeze lock enemies with him. Onto the flip side, we have Ancient Power Swagback 2. That's a 30% chance to omnibuff. As I mentioned earlier, the purpose of spamming Ancient Power is the speed buff, although Brycen appreciates the extra defenses. I would recommend Fast Track 2 as a lucky skill when running this. Brycen also has some newly found Haze utility as well. We have a single Haze NPR 2 tile. I am not a fan of the chance, but it's better than nothing. Haze MGR 9 returns some move gauge back guaranteed, and then there is Haze Flag Bearer 4 and Hype Up 4. That's a 50-50 coin flip on proccing party-wide attack and special attack buffs. I would not prioritize this on Brycen. Normally, you want to use Haze by mid to late game, after opposing trainers spend their buffs. But Brycen can top off the offenses of a striker if you need him to, so I can't complain. For the Ice Beam mode, I would suggest a grid like this, grabbing every single Ice Beam tile so Brycen is not total deadweight. Alternatively, you can drop the Haze tiles so you can grab Grand Entry 2 on the corner over here, and that would grant Brycen a modicum of offensive self-sufficiency. Alternatively, you can drop a single Ice Beam BP tile so you can nab Brycen's trainer move point refresh, and that could be clutch if Brycen is forced to tank. If you have no regards for Brycen's offensive capabilities, you can purely focus on Haze tiles and stack Ancient Power buffs with all the bulk available. This would be okay utility. But you can also take this approach and have Brycen work with pure Haze utility as well as Ice Beam Hostile Environment 2 so that he can crowd control enemies. I think these two modes are the best way to salvage Brycen if you are forced to bring him for Haze. With that out of the way, we can talk about Brycen is memes. Things I would never seriously recommend, but I have to go over them for completion's sake. Brycen now has a legitimate nuking mode with Heavy Hail 5 and Freezer Burn 5. This proc with Hail as weather and Freeze as a status respectively. This means Brycen needs Hail support. To enable this effectively, we need his fellow Ice-type gym leader Candice. With her grid, she can now proc Freeze at a 20% rate. With something like this and Hilbert support, Brycen and Candice can combine their freezing efforts to enable Brycen's nuke. The problem is that, despite having more multipliers, Brycen peaks lower than Candice because he has a larger attack gap. Nuke Brycen hits about as hard as Inertia V and Sirfetch'd. It's decent, but very tough to set up. It's not worth the effort when your partner nukes harder. If anything, Candice leeches better off of Brycen for team skills. Lastly, Brycen also has these random Hail DPS styles. If you want to humor this with custom Jasmine and Tech Lapras, go for it, but you could be using Price, Getsis, Oak, Candice, literally anything remotely competent instead. You can argue Hasty Hail is useful, but Candice has that, and as an offensive freeze partner, Brycen is outclassed by Price and Glacia. So yeah, Brycen remains a disaster. His grid is very lazy and a step down from Candice's caliber. If you put a gun to my head and force me to make a single grid investment tier list, Brycen would be rock bottom. Alright, this demon child stole the opportunity for a Wolfreak sync grid, but hey, that's okay, I am patient. Here we have Sophocles and Togedemaru, a 4-star electric type tech. Sophocles is one of the sync pairs I have used the least, but I am familiar with his output. It's poor. Sophocles' stat spread is reminiscent of Brycen. His special defense is okay and he can buff the stat, but it's counterbalanced with poor HP and defense. The lack of recovery holds back a Sophocles from tanking comfortably. Sophocles' trainer move buffs plus 3 attack and speed, and with his excellent speed stat, he can sustain gauge. The downside is a -2 defense penalty, again emphasizing Sophocles' negative matchup against physical opponents. You can neutralize this with Unbending as a lucky skill, but it's also available on the grid if it suits your fancy. Sophocles' moves are Sing Sap and Nozzle. The former has a 30% chance to flinch, while the latter paralyzes the target. And the Rain, Sophocles is purpose. He is a flinch bot with reliable paralysis utility. This is handy for select legendary arenas like Cobalion and Tornadus, but Sophocles has a couple roadblocks to overcome when performing this function. First, these moves are not easy to spam, and in spite of Sophocles' speed stat, he lacks move gauge refreshes, so it's hard to feed these moves in a cycle. Second, these moves are pathetically weak. Sophocles' attack stat is on the same threshold as supports. Nozzle is the worst offender. It's a 24 BP 3-bar move. Very loyal to its main series counterpart, but you are not clicking Nozzle past applying paralysis. There is just no point when Sing Sap is stronger, more gauge efficient, and offers a distinct secondary effect. Sophocles' innate tech multiplier is Flinch Hitter, which is notoriously difficult to use. Basically, almost every Centermon in this game has Listen Flinch 8. If you apply Flinch successfully, maybe after a couple moves, Flinch wears off. It has a very short lifespan. In order to use this effectively, you need auxiliary flinch partners to help stack the odds in your favor. As soon as you see flinch proc, you have to click your sync move. Time is of the essence when using this multiplier. And to wrap things up, Sophocles has Endurance as an innate passive. He's guaranteed to hang on from any instance of damage. Togedemaru is weak to ground, and sides in Champion Stadium love using Bulldoze and Earthquake as their desperation attack, so this helps. But lacking power reserves, there is no real advantage to this passive. Like any aspect of Sophocles I could compliment has a downside to it. He tanks special damage well, but physical damage murks him. He is a fast flinch bot, but Sync Sap is expensive to spam relative to Astonish. As an electric type, you could boost him with Electric Terrain, but his moves are weak. And he needs support for his sync multiplier. Fortunately, Sophocles' grid solvents a few of these issues. He now has Static Shock 5. It's a sync multiplier derived from paralysis, which is fantastic when Sophocles reliably applies that. If you miss Flinch Healer, you still have this as a consolation prize, and it's complemented by Paralysis Synergy 3. Speaking of, there is also Super Duper Effective 5, a very good multiplier, easy to use, non-conditional. Sophocles' sync saps aren't a complete joke with this, but to the attentive viewer, you might have spotted Cakewalk, a sync multiplier based on speed debuffs. This is one of the tougher multipliers to set up. Speed debuffs have virtually no utility outside of enhancing Cakewalk and Hunter's Instinct, and this might sound like a logistical nightmare because how do you provide this support for Sophocles? You don't. Sophocles now branches out into speed debuffing. Over this corner, we have Sync Sap Trip Up, a couple tiles at that. While the chances are not guaranteed, these are individual rolls, and Sophocles can bump up a Cakewalk by focusing Sync Sap on center. There is also Sync Sap MGR3, a very welcome addition that fixes Sophocles' gauge issues, and we have Sync Sap Aggravation 1 to enhance its flinch chance to 60%. Sync Sap is much more disruptive with this. Anyway, Cakewalk appears difficult, but Sync Sophocles is very realistic with a team composed of Lieutenant Surge and Vulner. Turn 1, you want Sophocles to use his turn move once, and then perma-spam Sync Sap to proc trip-up debuffs. BP Surge can then buff Sophocles' grid and top off his attack, and he can Thunder Wave to spare Sophocles the turn using Nozzle. Meanwhile, Vulner sets up Electric Terrain and attempts to proc Flinch for Sophocles' innate sync multiplier. With a sync nuking build, Sophocles nukes harder than Sydney and Mask Royal. Our good old scientist here is no longer a laughingstock. On the correct circumstances, he has a respectable sync nuke. But you may notice I am skipping a syncing tile. Sophocles' tiles are energy hungry. He is not easy to customize, which might explain some of my padding here. I would love to grab a Sync Sap Aggravation 1, but there is just not enough energy for it. Now, an issue about the team comp I mentioned is that, yes, Sophocles outnukes Vulner, but he doesn't outdamage 6-star EX Vulner. Likewise, Sophocles doesn't outdamage Cakewalk Clement, so you can't really justify him as a partner. Sophocles has a good nuke, but you have to be cautious with your team building so you don't end up using a suboptimal nuke. However, if you have no regards for Sync Nuke Sophocles, I would suggest a Flinch Pod mode instead. In this grid, I went for Super Duper Effective 5. You really shouldn't consider Sophocles outside of Electric Weak content. And that is also assuming you don't have Volner, because he flinches about as reliably. But Super Duper Effective 5 opens up more energy relative to Paralysis Synergy 3, and it's not dependent on the status. Here, you can make a choice between Unbending and Nozzle MGR9, depending on whether you have Unbending as a lucky skill or not. You can also build around Nozzle, but it's inferior to Sync Sap past the Paralysis proc. It's not worth touching. Sophocles also has Unyielding and Survivor mentality. This may be handy for some Alola-themed battle challenge, but in a broader context, Tank Sophocles is disappointing. He has to spend time buffing instead of disrupting, and he needs recovery support anyway. Sophocles' grid is decent. Now he's a viable single nuker and flinch bot, which were things he was horribly outclassed doing before, but in most likelihood you have better single nukers to use anyway. But well, that's it for the scrub grids. Next time we're gonna check out all the fancy new banners. I will probably prioritize Lusamine above all else, but I am done here. Thank you for watching, take care, and I hope to see you another time.